Another competitive TFT event is just around the corner. The mystery behind Fizz's targeting and current leading theories, 2x world champion, titles, current read on the meta and other itemization tips, and a new way to play around Ixtal. All of that and much more will be covered today as we go over what is currently going on in the TFT space. First, let's start off with the Subregional. In case you missed out on the first North American Subregional, well, good news. The second one is literally right around the corner. The first day of the event is going to be on January 23rd, which is literally 8 days from now, a little bit over a week. If you want to register, registration closes on January 20th, so in about 5 days from this point. If you want to register for the tournament and try to compete for yourself, which this is open to a lot of players, so I highly recommend signing up if you are interested in these kinds of things. If you go into Boise's Discord channel, you can find that there is a hashtag registered channel, which you can find under the announcements for tournaments, and over here, you'll be able to just type in your North American IGN as well as your hashtag, and you'll automatically be registered for the tournament. If you're trying to get your feet wet in competitive TFT, this is a great way to get started. I just wanted to announce it just because I know a lot of people miss the sub-regionals, myself included, so I just want to make sure that this is on your radar in case you get to catch this video. The link to his Discord will be linked below if you want to go sign up. The next thing I want to cover today is going to be TFT tips, which in case you don't know, is sort of the Japanese version of TFT Academy, which for everybody in North America, this is kind of what we use when it comes to trying to quickly get a read on the meta. But TFT tips is actually the Japanese home for this because this is actually ran by Title, who in case you don't know is the 2x world champion in TFT, who is arguably the best player in the entire world. Now, of course, not everybody can speak Japanese, but if you were to check out his website, you could see all of the tips and his conditions about how to play around certain compositions, and all of the information can be found here, which is incredibly useful. That being said, though, recently, Naroko on Twitter recently posted this graphic, which is a very easy way. You do not need to know any Japanese to understand what is going on here, which this is essentially a very condensed version of Title's TFT tips on his website. So if language barriers are going to be an issue for you, there's no problem. You can check out this infographic right here to get the general gist about each of the compositions and when to play around them. As you can tell, each composition is actually color-coded by a circle ring that tells you essentially the tier of the composition, and you can see just like very obvious ways of like, oh, for example, if I find too much value, then I can play into Echo Reroll, or maybe if I find like a Vigo 2, then I can play into Callista, etc. Of course, as always, I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to check out any of these resources. That being said, another really interesting resource that I found recently was actually posted by Impetuous Panda, who is an EUS caster, but also a very consistent challenger player on the EUS server. He recently posted this cheat sheet as well, which is his own personal cheat sheet, going over ranged unit itemizations, as well as what are the ideal items to put onto these units. Now, of course, there is a lot of information on this sheet as well, which is super nice to check out, but he also does list some of his biggest takeaways. Now, before we go over all of these, just make sure to keep in mind that you should take these with a grain of salt. As we've heard people like Mortog say in the past, stats tell you what things are, not what they is. I think. Essentially, the stats don't tell you the full story. They just tell you what things are under these conditions, but that doesn't necessarily give you the full context as to why they are the way that they are. I hope that makes sense. The first one being that Yunara BIS is actually now Titans. It's probably instead of overcracking instead. So Yunara itemization is now going to be something like Ginsu's IE Titans. His next point is that Callista still seems to prefer IE with Vanquisher active, meaning that a viable slam in the Shadow Isle line is going to be Infinity Edge, even though it may seem a bit redundant. I know a lot of times when people play into Shadow Isles, they're a little hesitant to slam IE, but it does seem like it is totally safe to do so. Another thing to note is that the Disruptor emblem seems to be insane on Lysandra. It's a minus 1.12 delta with the Seraphine duo comp. But in general, this Disruptor emblem just happens to be good on basically any unit. Now, of course, that is a bit misleading because if you have a Disruptor emblem and you can activate it, that usually means you got to level 9, you got to play around a Zero or some other really strong 5-cost Disruptor. His next point is that JG is generally really underperforming in the data, with Ziggs only being the real exception. And then finally, this is the point that I thought was really interesting, was that Fishbones for AD and Lichbane for AP generally are safe picks no matter your spot. As someone who likes to rip the Portable Forge on 2-1 sometimes, hitting Fishbones or Lichbane generally kind of feels bad for me personally, but knowing now that they are probably decent on any of these 4 or 5 cost carries means that's probably okay and safe to tempo with them. Again, I'll take it with a grain of salt, but it does seem like the data supports it to some degree. The next thing I want to go over today is going to probably be the bulk of today's video, which we're going to talk about Fizz targeting. So recently, Nandona on the competitive TFT subreddit posted this asking, do we genuinely not understand how Fizz targeting works? Because apparently the pros do not know either. And I can tell you from my understanding, at least from my circles as well, nobody actually really understands how it works or how he prioritizes his targets. Now there's a clip from Twitch that's also linked in here, which I will play as well, which was from Frodan's coaching during the pro circuit.
What's the logic of Fizz targeting? We don't have a consistent theory yet, but the #1 leading belief is that Fizz is actually not 4 hexes, it's 3.5, and Like it says that he goes to the farthest enemy within 4 hexes, but it's not true. It's within 3.5, and he tends to bias himself towards doing max damage with his splash. Because the other thing is he jumps to the farthest enemy within 4 hexes, then deals magic damage to adjacent enemies. He does like a little splash. People think that he targets as well to maximize that skill, but no one knows. It's just guesswork because there's been clips to suggest otherwise.
Exactly as Frodian said, yes, right now the leading theory is that Fizz's targeting is 3.5 hexes long, not exactly 4 as a unit like Diana. Now, the reason that people believe that this is the case is because when you play around Fizz, if it was actually 4 true hexes long, then putting him in A3 and A5 would mean that in a setup like this, he would actually always jump onto the Yunara here, very similar to how Diana is positioned. And as we have seen, people in the past, early on in the patch, people were putting Fizz in A3 or A5. But the reality is that Fizz doesn't actually end up on the Yunara when positioned like this, and instead actually ends up on the Yunara when positioned in A1 or A7 with the opposing tank on the same side. This has led a lot of pro players to believe that yes, Fizz's targeting is in fact 3.5 hexes instead of 4. So if you've ever played around Fizz and you don't understand why it's not going into the backline, you should try putting Fizz in one of the top 2 corners, A1 or A7. But now how to actually counter this positioning is also really difficult, because the way that he actually jumps and targets which unit he wants to attack is not really well known yet. Just to give an example, if we were to put a unit next to Yunara as well as a secondary carry, let's just put the Lux there as just for visual sake, we don't actually know if he always targets the Yunara here or the Lux instead when in this hex. Most of the time, I believe most players do believe that he will still target the Yunara instead, but it does sometimes ends up being conflicting based on some clips that we've seen in the past. So how do we actually counter the Fizz positioning? Well, Asa a while back had posted this as well, talking about how it's possible for you to actually default against Fizz by clumping your corner carry behind 2 ranged carries. This actually ends up trapping your unit onto the right hex, but that also means that Fizz is actually unable to reach this unit and instead will try to kill the Rise or the Caitlyn instead. Now, of course, as the battle progresses, if you are too strong against your opponents, you might end up doing yourself a huge disservice by accidentally trapping your unit as your units keep trying to move forward, but your Ziggs is stuck in the corner. On top of that, for obvious reasons, this positioning is very susceptible to AoE. This can also be done, by the way, by using things like Azir soldiers. So sometimes you'll see players on level 10 teching an Azir to specifically trap their ranged carry if they know that they have a Fizz inside of their rotation as a last 1v1. But another way that's a little less susceptible to AoE can also be found here, explained by none other than Bosso Skills, who's also a rank 1 North American player. He explains this pretty well, so I'm just going to let the clip play for itself.
Basically, if you position like this, like you make the Fizz walk up to hit the cannon, and then it won't auto jump to your corner, and it'll jump here usually. Like you don't need all of these units. Like you can do this, and it should still jump here. I just did this like illustrate kind of normal positioning, and then on this side it's the same thing. Like you're trying to make the Fizz, like you're just trying to make it so it's not autoing something in the corner, right? Like if you have your frontliner here or here, this Fizz will be like standing here and will just jump to your Vigar. So like you make your Fizz walk out, and then it like walks wherever, and then it jumps to Teemo. I think this is also a 50-50. Like if you just have your tank here and you have your like Teemo AFK, I think this is also 50-50.
So exactly as Bosso Skills said, essentially by making sure that the Fizz doesn't actually have a tank in order to auto essentially immediately over in your A1 or A7 hex, you can actually force it to move first and then jump to a bait unit such as this Ahri here inside of the C row. Now, one last thing to know about anti-Fizz positioning that I want to share, which is my own tech, which is this kind of positioning right here. You put your main tank over here onto A5 and you put a shitter tank over onto D5. The idea being is that as Fizz walks up, it will actually end up aggroing this Shen first, and then it'll jump away over towards the Fiddlesticks here over onto B3. Obviously, this doesn't have to be a Fiddlesticks. He's obviously the ideal, but any unit here could work just fine. Granted, as long as it is a ranged unit. Now, if you see somebody using this kind of tech, which I would doubt because I literally figured this out about like an hour ago after testing. But the way to counter this is to simply put your Fizz over here into this hex instead, because I believe this should jump onto the Yunara, but I could be mistaken. That being said though, to simply counter this, now the Yunara can simply go over here, and once again, your Yunara is safe. Although the second Fizz jump might be a little dicey. But anyways, if you're struggling with Fizz, I hope this tip helps you out. But on the topic of positioning, let's also talk a little bit about singed positioning, because sometimes people are not putting singed in the right hex, and I think that might be problematic. Now, this is a clip from Boxbox's stream, but this is really well explained as to why you want to always put singed in A1 or A7.
Did you see how I positioned my Kindred to the left so that my Yunara doesn't get stunned by Swain? Watch what happens to the Swain, or watch what happens to my Yunara. It's a targeting bug. You purposely move your Singe to the top left corner, and then he just runs away from Yunara, and Yunara follows him. She moves to the left and gets herself stunned. You see that? The Singe just drags her one to the left, and then she gets herself stunned. And then as you see, I then lose by 90 HP on the Heavy as the Crown user. Like, look how close this fight ends up becoming. Keeping in mind that I just lost 3 seconds of DPS. Look at that. I lost by 92 HP, 1 auto attack.
So, as he explains as well, this is why you want to always keep Singe in A1 or A7 because you want to abuse the targeting bug. This is actually not intended. The actual intent of this feature is that once Singe actually starts moving away far enough from your primary carry, you're supposed to de-aggro and retarget onto somebody else, but unfortunately, instead, your carry gets dragged along. And sometimes, you might even have some really bad case scenarios where your carry ends up going all the way up to the B row, and that can be very problematic. But finally, I'm not going to go too in-depth on this one, but this was a really beautiful game played by none other than WasianIverson that I just wanted to share with you guys. I'm not going to talk about this too much, but from this spot in particular, he ends up clicking on a roll to force Ixtal, which I thought was really, really interesting and not a line you get to see too commonly. If you want to see what his 2 on board looks like, he essentially could have played Slayers from his spot, but instead of playing Slayers, he actually ends up playing Ixtal from this position. Again, really cool game. I will timestamp and link it in the description below if you want to go check it out. But I just thought it was a very interesting line that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about, so I highly recommend watching the game. But that basically does it for today's video. I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys have learned a little bit more about the TFT space. If you have any questions or any pieces of news you think I should cover, please leave it in the comment section below. I'd love to check it out. With that being said, I hope this was fun. I hope this was helpful. See you guys in the next one. Take care, guys. Happy climbing.